We want to try to call the committee meeting to order if we can make our way in. Thank you. At this point, we're going to call to order the meeting of the Joint Committee for Facilities and Real Estate and Budget, Finance, and Business Operations. We've got a number of reports to run through. We're going to get some updates. The Senate just released their bill moments ago, their budget, and Tim is going to give us an update on that. The first portion of the meeting will be the Budget Committee portion, and the second portion will be the Facilities and Real Estate portion. So as we begin, let me ask Tim Jones to join us at the podium. He's going to give us an update on the stimulus in 2009-2010 legislative appropriations package, and hopefully an update on what the Senate just passed out this morning, or this afternoon. Tim?
Thank you very much. In front of your chair, there should be a white folder that has information. White folder that has some information in it that I'll be going over.
Sorry, 1 second, Tim. I'm sorry, continue, Tim.
First, I'm going to refer to the American Recovery and Investment Act. That's a yellow document. The first page behind that cover is a letter from the governor to the president certifying that Florida will use the stimulus funds to create jobs and promote economic growth. He sent that to the president here recently. Page 2 through 5 of your packet lists the various funds and state agencies that will be receiving stimulus funds. And particularly, you'll want to pay attention to on page 2, row number 1, that has education/DOE and DOG. This is the budget and stabilization funds. If you follow across that row, that's the $2.2 billion that you've heard us talk about in the past that will be coming to Florida for K-20. The other row that will be of interest to you is row number 4, which says all agencies. This is the discretionary portion of the budget stabilization fund that totals $490 million that can be used by the governor for either general government, public safety, or education. So it's important that we express to the governor some needs that we have in the education arena, so maybe we can possibly get some of those funds. The rest of the funds listed on here are other Florida agencies, and the very total on page 5 shows about $14.5 billion coming to Florida for various stimulus activities. We are still waiting on the U.S. DOE official guidelines to apply for the stabilization funds. We've received those draft guidelines last week. We understand the official guidelines or final guidelines should be out by the end of this week. At that point, the application will be completed on behalf of the governor. In that application, there will be the maintenance of effort requirement that everyone talks about. We'll have to show that we're meeting that requirement. If not, we'll have to request a waiver. So that is all still forthcoming. Once the U.S. DOE gets that application and reviews it, then we could get the first slug of money, which is about 67%, within a couple of weeks of that application. The very last page of that packet, page 6, lists other federal agencies that are receiving stimulus funds, of which the universities will have the opportunity to apply for contracts, grants, and so forth. So you can get a little description there. Each university is monitoring this and will be on their own to fill out those applications for those funds. Also, last Thursday, the governor unveiled his website on Florida's initiative on the Recovery Act, and you can see his website at flarecovery.com. In addition, our website has been updated with a link on various Recovery Act information. I've also been participating in the Governor's Recovery Act implementation team led by Don Winstead. We meet twice a week to get an update on the various funds and status of those applications. The General Government Accountability Office, the feds have been visiting Florida. They've identified 16 states that they're going to pay special attention to in terms of the accountability requirements for the stimulus funds. Derry Harper, our IG, has been meeting with the governor's IG and other state agency IGs to make sure they stay on top of that. Any questions on the American Recovery and Investment Act?
Thank you, Tim. Governor Parker.
And one question I have, Tim, is that is there really any indication from the preliminary documents you've seen so far to indicate how quickly we'll actually receive the money?
Once we talk about the stabilization funds, once the governor submits the application, it'll be reviewed by the U.S. DOE, and we could get the first part of the funds up to 67% within a couple of weeks. But once again, we have to wait for our legislature to do an appropriation, which means the funds for us wouldn't be available until July 1 of the new fiscal year. The balance of the stabilization funds would come within 6 months after we fill out some additional paperwork. Of course, there's always paperwork involved in getting that. So by the fall, we should have the entire $2.2 billion if everything works out.
Other questions for Tim? All right. Thank you, Tim. Will you go ahead and move into the auxiliary facilities?
Well, I'm going to go back just a little bit and talk about the appropriations
All right.
process for a second. There's a green cover in your packet that has some information regarding our three primary sources of funding, GR, lottery, and PICO funds. And just want to kind of go over with the committee a little bit about the current state status and the funding source for each of those. And you can see here on the screen what GR has done over the last several years, indicated by the red line. The blue line is the Revenue Estimating Conference's prediction last November, and then the orange line is the Estimating Conference estimate from just a couple of weeks ago. So you can see how much more it has dropped here this month compared to last November. And I want you to take a look at page 6 behind your green folder. I'm going to walk through this sheet here so you kind of understand the challenges that's being faced by the legislature. This is a document that was passed out at the Senate Ways and Means Committee by Senator Alexander last week. The first half of this document starts off fiscal year 08-09. You can see the recurring, non-recurring, and total column. And the total column for the regular session ending last year was $594 million balance. Well, since then, there's been various adjustments. Revenue has gone down. They've had to dip into reserves, and they had projected an ending balance of $366 million. And right below that, you'll see the March Estimating Conference revised the revenues down by a little over $1 billion, so they could end up with a deficit this year of $706 million. And right below that, they are expecting some stimulus funds to come in this fiscal year of $1.2 billion, along with some Medicaid issues that they're having a deficit they'll have to cover. So if they get those stimulus funds in this year, they could actually end up with a $206 million balance, assuming revenues don't get any worse than what they have been. So then going on down is their starting point for fiscal year 2009-10. They start off with that $206 million beginning balance. The revenues from March is $20 billion, as shown on the chart. Expenses for this year are $24 billion, so there's a $4 billion gap between revenue and recurring expenditures. So that leaves them a deficit of 3.7, almost $4 billion. Then they have what they call their must-fund issues for Medicaid, FEFP, that's the K-12 funding, RLE, that's a required local effort loss to reduction in property taxes in our counties, in prisons. So must fund issues total $2.2 billion, leaving a total deficit of over $6 billion. And then it's very important, that next line is they're estimating using 2.9 or almost $3 billion in stimulus funds next year, with the remaining deficit of $3 billion that they'll either have to make up through cuts or other revenue sources. So that's kind of the challenges that they are facing. Lottery is the same. This chart will show where your lottery revenues were in red, what the blue estimates were in October, and then in February they revised those estimates downward again. And finally, our third source for fixed capital outlay is our PICO revenues, which is taking a tremendous hit, and Chris will be going over a revised PICO budget here shortly. But you can see on PICO for 9/10 is at $95 million, our lowest in anyone's recollection. As Governor Perez indicated, the Senate released their budget earlier. And I think some of you were at that committee meeting. For those of you who weren't, let me just kind of give you the highlights of that. For the university system, bottom line, their goal was to make the university system budget for 9/10 equal to 08-09. To do that, they had to do a 9% general revenue cut, which totals about $170 million. That is being offset by about $155 million in stimulus funds and $10 million in Indian gaming revenues. The Indian gaming revenues would be recurring, according to their information, of course, where the stimulus funds are non-recurring. So you would get those for 1 year. The way they're doing the stabilization funds for stimulus is they would give out half of those in 9/10, save the other half in 10-11. So if we get $155 million in 9/10, there's a good chance we'll get another $155 in 10-11. They're also recommending an 8% base tuition increase, and they're also recommending funding for the 2 new medical schools of about $9.3 million for UCF Med School. This board had requested $10.3, and for the FIU Med School, they're recommending $9.9 million. We had $10.9 million in our recommendation, so very close to the recommendation. There was no other funding for any of the other medical schools. For the board general office budget, it's an overall 15% reduction to the board office, plus an additional $200,000 that we normally transfer to Florida State University for the Florida Conflict Resolution Council that had been doing some work for us. So it gets up to about a 20% cut for us, or about $1 million. Just kind of put that in perspective. Over the last 2 years, we've lost a total of 18% and $1.2 million. So this is almost in one fell swoop, equal to what we've lost the last 2 years. In terms of positions, that could be as high as 10 to 15 positions for our office, on top of the 12 that we have already left. I've already lost. Any questions about that?
Questions for Tim? Okay, Tim, thanks for that. What we're going to do, I'm sorry, Chairman Kivett.
Other than the gaming and stimulus, was there any other indication in the Senate bill of other revenue sources?
No.
Yeah, in fact, at the committee meeting, there was a great deal of very positive talk about the university systems, the progress they're making, how they're hitting the marks, and frankly, the Board of Governors. So it was a nice meeting to sit in. President Marshall.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I have a number of questions, and some of which I'm reluctant to ask, but I can't help wondering. Tim, if we go back to page 2 of your first material, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, where we specify the uses to which that money is to be put. When I see things like homeless education, I wonder what in the world we could be talking about. And I realize you probably don't have answers to some of these questions too, but have you begun to think about that, homeless education and school lunch equipment? How are we going to use that money?
I'm not, which rows are you looking at?
He's on line 2 under the DOE section.
Oh,
yeah.
that's for K-12 programs, so it'll be up to the Department of Education and Commissioner Smith to sort all that out. And a lot of those areas, Title I, IDEA programs, or existing programs within K-12, this would just be additional federal stimulus dollars for them.
Well, I realize that isn't your primary responsibility, but in another way, it's sort of the responsibility of all of us. We're accepting this federal money. We look forward to it, to receiving it, and I'm all for that too. And we need all the help we can get. But I am concerned about for the judgment of Floridians, the wisdom of all of us in using that money in a reasonably responsible way. Something like homeless education. I don't know what Eric would say if he were here, but I haven't any idea what that means. Anybody else?
I think they've got some rehabilitation monies for homeless centers that flow from the federal government. Most homeless centers, the bulk of the funding comes from the federal government, and I think they park some of that in the K-12 system.
Seems to me to be an odd place to put it.
Yeah. Well, yes, that's throughout the bill.
Okay, let's move on. I appreciate
Thank you, President Marshall. At this point, I'm sorry, Chair, did you have another
One more
question? Certainly.
And you, Tim probably said this and I've missed it, but in the Senate, budget, how much, stimulus money is in there, 150?
155.1 million.
And that can be used just for operations?
Yes, the idea was to get that back into the universities to bring the per-student funding up to the same level they have this year.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Tim. At this point in time, since we've got a strategic planning committee which is going to follow, and my apologies to staff, I didn't warn Tim we were going to do this, and we've got all of the folks here for the strategic planning committee, we thought it'd be appropriate to recess this meeting until a time certain at the end of the strategic planning committee meeting, so we can have all of our speakers and those involved in the strategic planning committee participate and finish their work here and get home in a reasonable hour while we stay and slug through the budget and finance. Is there a motion of the effect to recess to a specific time? Got a motion and second. Any questions? Issues? All in favor of recessing until the end of the strategic planning committee and letting Governor Martin's committee begin, please say aye.
Aye.
And opposed. Motion carries. We're recessed until the end of strategic planning.
Before we start the next meeting, I want to correct my bad manners from this morning and welcome Cindy O'Connell from the University of Florida Board, who was here patiently all morning and sat at the table. And I chatted with her, and I was real happy, and I kept smiling at her in front of me, but I failed to recognize her. And so, Cindy, thank you very much for coming. And And that's probably why I saw you. It was probably because I'm looking at him now, and all of a sudden I said, gee, she looks different. Thanks for coming. Okay.